Let's take a look at how the validator class works under the hood. Our constructor method begins by initializing a few instance variables: our PMax campaign, the empty error list, and an isRetail variable, which is useful for tracking across the class, considering you can create assetless asset groups in the PMax retail campaigns. Finally, we load a file containing information about the asset requirements. In my example, I'm using a file called, yep, you guessed it, assetRequirements.json. I want to take a second to call out a few differences between the asset requirements you see on the screen and the actual documented asset requirements. First, I've split headlines and descriptions into two separate entries to account for the short versions of each. I discussed this earlier. Second, the cumulative maximum number of images allowed is 20. For simplicity, I've just split this evenly for the two required image types, marketing images and square images. Similarly, the cumulative maximum number of logos allowed is 5, so I've set the max to 5, even though this could technically be divided among logos and optional square logos. Now, let's take a look at the isPMaxCampaignValid method, which has two basic steps. First, we validate asset groups, then we validate the bidding strategy. There are, of course, other things we could validate, but these capture a number of common mistakes and illustrate several important points. The valid asset groups method returns a list of all valid asset groups after any automatic fixes have been applied. If the list is empty, we can return false because all PMax campaigns require at least one asset group to serve. Otherwise, we'll overwrite the asset groups entry in our PMax campaign's instance variable to capture any automatic fixes that were applied. Finally, we'll return the result of isBidding strategy valid. Most of the validation logic in this class is handled by the valid asset groups method and its submethods. And the main goal of this method is to ensure our asset requirements are properly addressed. At a high level, the process for validating asset groups is as follows. First, we'll validate the asset group info entry in each asset group. Then, we'll validate the asset group signals entry. We'll add any valid asset groups to a list called valid asset groups. If the length of our original asset groups list equals the length of our valid asset groups list, we know all of our asset groups are valid. If not, we can still proceed by leveraging the skip invalid asset group setting. Next, we'll validate the number of asset groups since there is a max of 100 asset groups per campaign, and we'll do so in the validate num asset groups method. Otherwise, we'll return an empty list signaling that we should not create this campaign. Let's see how to validate asset group info by stepping into the validate asset group info method. There are basically 5 possible states for our asset group info. 1, the asset group is missing an asset group info entry and is part of a retail campaign. This is okay, because we can just create an assetless retail campaign. So we'll just return the asset group. 2, the asset group is missing an asset group info entry, but it's not a retail campaign. This is not allowed, so we'll return an empty dictionary so the asset group is not created. 3, the asset group info entry is present and contains errors, but we can simply create an assetless asset group in a retail campaign. In this case, we'll delete the asset group info entry and return the resulting asset group. 4, the asset group info entry is present and contains errors, but we have no path to fix this issue. In this case, we'll return an empty dictionary so that we don't create the asset group. And finally, number 5, the asset group info entry is present and entirely valid, in which case we'll just return the valid asset group.